The night air trembles before anyone hears the helicopter. A low, uneven thump rolls over the dark perimeter, too offbeat to be normal. The AH-64 Apache cuts through the haze with its landing lights flickering, beams stretching thin across the tarmac like trembling fingers. Inside the cockpit, warnings pulse in frantic bursts, amber then red then gone, as if the aircraft itself can't decide how close it is to dying. Hydraulic scent mixes with the metallic sting of overheated circuitry. A faint trail of smoke curls from the fuselage, lost in the wash of the rotors. The pilot fights the controls, the cyclic shuddering in his gloves. The HUD blurs, recalibrates, blurs again. The aircraft drops too fast, catches itself, dips left. The base's runway lights flare up through the haze, like a corridor leading toward impact rather than safety. The Apache hits hard, skids scraping, metal shrieking, sparks biting into the asphalt. The birds slide several meters before lurching to a stop. Fire-retardant foam erupts around it as silhouettes sprint toward the wreck, their movements sharp, urgent, wordless. The alarms inside the cockpit give one last shrill note before the power dies completely, plunging the cabin into a suffocating, unnatural quiet. A single dog tag swings from a clipped loop on the console, tapping lightly against the metal as the aircraft settles into stillness. This Apache was repaired 3 times. Signed off by experts, inspected by specialists, certified airworthy. Tonight, it nearly killed its crew. And that's when the commander called the one person no manual ever mentioned, a legendary veteran who once flew these machines like they answered only to her pulse. Dawn creeps over the base in muted shades of gray, the kind of color that never fully becomes morning. The hangars open one by one, their metal tracks groaning as if they resent the cold. Forklifts hum in lazy arcs. A distant fuel truck whines as it reverses. But the center of the flight line remains still, an island of silence around the wounded Apache. Foam clings to its skids in hardened clumps, like frost that refuses to melt. The scorched streaks along its fuselage glint faintly in the newborn light, turning the aircraft into a dull, metallic scar against the concrete. Mechanics walk past without slowing. They glance, but they do not approach. It isn't avoidance. It's reverence. Some machines demand distance after a night like that. Inside his office overlooking the flight line, the commander sits with a stack of reports that grow heavier each time he reads them. He rewinds telemetry printouts, scrolls through diagnostics on a tablet, flips through the maintenance logs that should make sense but don't. Coffee sits untouched beside him, steamed out hours ago. A wall clock ticks with the dry insistence of a metronome marking failure. Above his desk hangs a framed photograph, the unit's first Apache deployment. The faces are blurred by years of sun, but the silhouettes of rotor blades, the Apache's unmistakable crown, remain clear. He stares at the picture longer than he means to, searching for a certainty that isn't there anymore. A knock comes. The surviving pilot steps inside. There's no heroism in his posture, no celebration. He stands still, not out of discipline, but because movement feels too loud. Medical staff cleared him. Vitals checked. No concussion. Fit for duty. Paperwork stamped. The system has already returned him to the cycle, but his breathing hasn't caught up. In the mess hall, he sits at a corner table, helmet bag set beside him like an injured limb. He holds a cup of coffee with both hands, not drinking it, letting the heat climb into his palms. Around him the room buzzes, chairs scraping, utensils clattering, low conversations rising and folding back into each other. But all he hears is rotor thump memory echoing in his skull. Eyes trace the rim of the cup as if it were an instrument dial still flickering. When he gets up to leave, he forgets the bag under the chair. He doesn't notice until he's already out the door. Back on the flight line, whispered conversation forms a current that travels faster than official reports. Ground crews circle near a toolbox cart, voices kept low. They'd begun calling it the cursed bird, not out of superstition, but because 3 separate repairs never solved the same problem, and now the aircraft has drawn blood again. They trade theories, bad wiring, aging components, a misaligned sensor array. But each version ends the same way. Something's wrong that shouldn't be. The commander walks the perimeter of the Apache alone. No clipboard, no crew following behind. Just him and the machine. He slides a hand along the underside of the fuselage, fingertips brushing over chipped paint, grime, the uneven texture where emergency foam dried overnight. He climbs onto the skid, leans into the cockpit for a moment. The dog tag still hangs there, motionless now. It wasn't supposed to be left behind. It feels like a message even though it's only metal. He breathes out slowly, shoulders sinking as if the weight of the entire aircraft has climbed onto them. They brought in avionics experts, depot-level technicians, software analysts who combed through code line by line. 3 full repair cycles, each more thorough than the last. And the Apache still fought its pilot last night. He steps down from the skid and looks out across the waking base. Rotor tests beginning, mechanics rolling out tool carts, pilots gathering in briefing rooms. The day has resumed without asking his permission. There's only one thought that keeps pressing back into his mind, a name he hasn't spoken in years. A veteran who once commanded these machines with a precision no manual could describe. Someone who disappeared into quiet consulting roles after leaving the cockpit behind. Someone who sees patterns others miss. He turns toward his office with a new certainty. This time, they'll need her. The administrative building wakes long before the pilots do. Its cold fluorescent lights buzz faintly, casting a sterile, washed-out glow over the beige walls and linoleum floors. A printer clicks to life, ejecting pages heavy with block text, signatures, and acronyms. Someone slides a stack of forms into an outbox. Someone else rubber stamps a memo with the detached rhythm of habit. The near crash from the night before ripples through this environment in quiet, procedural waves. No raised voices. No urgent announcements. Just paperwork, its own kind of battlefield. On a long table near the hallway, a fresh packet lies half complete. At the top is a line stamped in red, safety of flight, immediate action required. Beneath it, the Apache's tail number sits in sober black print. A clerk staples the pages without looking up, the motion practiced, mechanical. Forms move left to right, right to left. Schedules are adjusted. Resources reallocated. The building swallows incidents whole and digests them into process. Down the corridor, another door opens. Inside lies the squadron scheduling room, whiteboard walls covered in grids of names and tail numbers. A junior officer wipes the board clean, erasing mission assignments one by one. The Apache's number is the first to vanish. Then the pilot's name is quietly removed from rotation, replaced with a single dash that means, not today. Possibly not soon. No one speaks. Pens scratch. Dry erase fumes linger in the air. In the base auditorium, the weekly safety briefing proceeds with an unnerving calm. The projector hums as slides flick from one bullet point to the next. Risk mitigation. Operational deviations. Checklist discipline. The usual language of aviation safety, cold, formal, stripped of emotion. The pilots sit in rows, shadows from the dimmed lights stretching long across the floor. Faces are never shown. Instead, the camera lingers on boots tapping lightly, fingers interlacing, notebooks opening and closing. The instructors speak in even tones, but the room feels suspended, like everyone knows the briefing is a ritual rather than a cure. In the back row sits the commander. He watches not the screen, but the people. Who's leaning forward? Who's staring at the floor? Who's still unsettled from last night's emergency landing? He taps a pen against a folded document but never writes anything down. Outside, the air stirs as a nondescript transport vehicle rolls up to the base gate. No escort. No ceremony. Just a slow stop at the checkpoint, and a figure stepping out. Boots hit the pavement with the deliberate steadiness of someone who has walked onto bases like this for decades. A worn duffel hangs from one shoulder. The jacket is old, faded Apache patch, stitching frayed from years of sun, sand, and sweat. A guard hands over a clipboard. The figure signs without hesitation. The camera never rises above shoulder level. Inside reception, the fluorescent lights make her jacket's patch glow faintly. A clerk slides a visitor badge across the counter, the lanyard coiling like a quiet invitation. She picks it up, pins it under the edge of her collar, and turns toward the corridor without waiting for instructions. She knows these halls. Or halls like them. Word travels fast. A few heads lift as she passes. Not in recognition, most of the current crew have only heard rumors, but in a subtle awareness that someone important has arrived. Someone different. She stops outside the commander's office. The frosted window pane catches only her outline, straight posture, squared shoulders, stillness that feels lived in rather than forced. When he opens the door, morning light from the window frames her silhouette. He gestures her inside with the slight nod of someone who has run out of conventional solutions. The office seems smaller with her in it. She doesn't sit. Instead, she stands near the window, facing the flight line. From her vantage point, the wounded Apache is a distant shape, one among many, but she seems to sense exactly where it rests. On the desk lies a thick folder, its corner creased from being handled too many times. He pushes it toward her. She reaches for it with a scarred hand, a dog tag wrapped around her wrist like a quiet habit she never broke. She opens the file and begins reading. The narration describes the rhythm more than the content. Her eyes scan quickly at first, absorbing the overview, the technical jargon, the timestamps. Then she slows at specific entries, a maintenance log here, a fault code there. Her finger taps that one line, just once. Not a gesture of surprise, recognition. She closes the folder gently, the way a pilot closes a canopy before deciding whether the aircraft will obey. The room stays silent. The air between them feels charged, though neither moves. She sets the folder down. And for the first time since the accident, the commander feels the faintest shift, like gravity rearranging itself around a new center. The flight line is quieter at midday, heat rising off the concrete in wavering ripples. Most of the aircraft sit under shade structures or canvas covers, but the damaged Apache remains exposed, untouched, as if the entire base is holding its breath around it. She steps onto the tarmac with her duffel still slung over her shoulder, though she hasn't needed it for hours. The bag is just a habit, like the dog tag at her wrist or the way her boots touch the ground with a pilot's practiced sensitivity. She walks slowly, tracing the line of aircraft with her fingertips brushing each fuselage in passing. Not affectionate, evaluative. When she reaches the Apache, she stops. Its serial plate is dull, worn. Beneath the fresh paint she notices faint outlines of older unit markings, ghosts of past assignments. She runs her thumb across the worn edge, then steps back as if reading the aircraft the way some people read faces. The narration notes it quietly. She doesn't just see the airframe. She reads its scars like a biography. Inside the maintenance office, fluorescent light flickers over rows of binders and screens. Digital logs scroll endlessly, hours flown, faults recorded, components replaced. She sits before the monitor, one hand flat on the desk, the other tracing down the columns of entries. It begins like any ordinary review, codes, timestamps, sign-offs. But she moves through them with increasing precision, like a surgeon finding the real issue beneath layers of swelling. She pauses over one line, replacement of a component in the electrical system. A similar repair appears again 80 flight hours later, unusual, but possible. Then a third time within half that interval. Her brow barely shifts, but the narration senses the tension sharpening. This is not normal variation. It's a pattern trying to hide. She pulls a binder from the shelves. Hard copy logs, older but often more honest than digital entries. Dust rises as she flips through. The handwritten entries show the same component issues, but the cause descriptions differ each time. Corrosion. Intermittent fault. Burned connector. Different language for the same problem. Someone is masking repetition with variety. On another page, she finds the signatures. Initials. Times. Shift numbers. They form a pattern more telling than the faults themselves. Several repairs were signed off during a shift that didn't align with the Apache's actual flying schedule. According to the logs, maintenance was performed after missions that never happened, or before flights that were delayed. Either time was being manipulated, or the logs were being written after the fact. Neither choice is benign. Her finger taps the same initials again. Once. Twice. Then she flips ahead several months. The same signature appears during a period when the aircraft was supposedly down for parts. That's not just sloppiness. That's fabrication. A memory flickers, a cockpit bathed in warning lights years ago, her own pulse synced with the stuttering vibrations of a failing system. She remembers limping an Apache through a controlled ditching because someone upstream had approved parts under pressure. She remembers the quiet settlement, the folded paperwork, the apology that never arrived. The past does not intrude emotionally, she's trained for that, but it sharpens her focus now like a second pair of eyes. She returns to the hangar with a flashlight in hand. The day has dipped toward evening, leaving long shadows that stretch across the concrete. She crouches beneath the aircraft, sliding onto a mechanic's creeper to examine wiring harnesses, hydraulic lines, and structural mounts. Dust clings to her sleeves, solvent smell drifts faintly from the open panels. Her flashlight beam glides over fasteners, standard, standard, standard. Then it stops. One minor routing clamp is misaligned. A wire bundle is secured in a way that would pass a cursory inspection but fail under high-torque maneuvers. Not immediately. Not obviously. But inevitably. A pilot under stress wouldn't have time to diagnose this. A ground crew under pressure might not catch it. Someone with access, motive, or fear would. She reaches up and touches the metal lightly. Not sabotage. Not a freak accident. A careless shortcut covered by confident signatures. The narration settles on her final realization. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, one that nearly wrote a crew's obituary. And tomorrow, she will prove it. The plan forms in silence. Not in a briefing room or across a crowded table, but in the commander's dim office, where the blinds are half drawn and the Apache sits visible in the distance like a wounded animal waiting to be tested. She stands beside the desk, reviewing the layout of the aircraft systems. The narration explains what neither of them voices. She will fly a controlled test mission. She will recreate the conditions the crew faced. And she will coax the fault into revealing itself. No speeches. No objections. Just a quiet nod from the commander, the kind that finalizes decisions without needing a single word. 5.1 Night Flight Preparation. Darkness filters across the base long before the operation begins. Sodium lights flicker on one by one, washing the flight line in gold. A fuel truck idles near the edge of the tarmac. Crew members move with slow, deliberate motions, reflective vests glowing, breath visible in the cool air. The Apache is rolled out from the hangar. Under artificial light, it looks almost healthy, its scars washed out, its faults silenced by the stillness. But she knows its truth better than the sheen of fresh paint suggests. She runs her hand along the rotor mast, fingers pressing into bolts as if feeling for a pulse. Her thumb grazes the very panel that hides the misaligned routing clamp. She touches it not with reverence, but with certainty. This is where the deception breathes. Ground crew watch her in respectful silence. They know her reputation, even if they don't know her name. Legends travel faster than documents. She checks the tail rotor, the hydraulic lines, the landing gear. No theatrics. No second guessing. Just discipline. 5.2 Cockpit Ritual. Inside the cockpit, only instrument light touches her gloves. She pulls the canopy closed, sealing herself into a chamber of whirring fans and warming electronics. She flips switches in a sequence faster than most pilots dare to attempt, each movement the product of thousands of hours in this exact seat. The narration notes the intimacy of it. She is not flying the Apache. She is speaking its language. The MFD's multifunction displays blink to life one by one, flooding the cabin with muted blues and greens. She straps in her harness, tightens the lap belt, and taps the helmet's side bracket where her dog tag, looped around her wrist, rests against the glove. In the operations room, the commander watches from behind thick glass. Screens show engine readouts, flight telemetry, and system health indicators. At his side stand technicians with headphones, each monitoring a different slice of the helicopter's nervous system. A soft mechanical hum rises as the engines spool. The rotor blades begin turning, slow at first, then gaining momentum until the world outside the cockpit becomes a blur of motion. The test mission begins. 5.3 Takeoff. The Apache lifts with controlled grace, rising into the night sky like a shadow freed from the ground. The landing lights cut off, leaving only the blinking anti-collision beacons pulsing red across the darkness. She banks left, then right, running through the initial test profile. The aircraft responds smoothly, almost too smoothly. The narration points out that machines with something to hide often behave perfectly at first. She increases power. The engines tone shift. The rotor disc strains slightly as torque builds. In the operations room, data scrolls across monitors in calm, predictable lines. 5.4 Inducing stress. She changes altitude abruptly, dropping low over the training grounds, then lifting into a sharp climb that stresses the airframe. Wind pushes across the fuselage, buffeting the tail. The Apache shudders. Sensors detect rising temperatures in the electrical system. This is where the fault begins, where it always begins. Ground monitoring picks up the first small anomaly. A technician calls it out quietly. The commander leans forward. She keeps flying, personal heartbeat steady, breathing slow. She banks again, harder now, pushing the limits that would terrify a newer pilot. The Apache responds, but reluctantly. She watches the MFD flicker once, barely perceptible. It flickers again. This is it. 5.5 The fault exposes itself. Warning tones burst into the cockpit. Beep, beep, beep. Electrical fault. Possible overload. The same phantom failure that brought the last pilot home on pure instinct. But she is ready. She counters with micro-adjustments, control inputs so subtle they look like stillness. She reroutes power, shifts priority loads, and stabilizes pitch. The fault grows louder, angrier. But she keeps the aircraft alive. Data spikes on every monitor in operations. A cascade of numbers rises in red columns. Then it happens, the exact signature she predicted. The misrouted wiring, stressed by the high-torque maneuver, pushes the system into failure. Except now, every sensor logs it. No one can hide behind corrupted paperwork. She guides the Apache through the failure curve, exploiting the system instead of fearing it. This time, the bird does not win. She does. 5.6 Landing and Revelation. When she lands, the Apache skids touch down with a gentleness that seems almost ceremonial. The rotors slow. The cockpit falls silent except for the cooling tick of hot metal. Tech crews rush in, but she waves them off. She steps down, removes her helmet, and walks toward the operations building with calm purpose. Inside, the monitors show the truth in brutal clarity. The logs from previous fixes do not match the real behavior of the system. The signatures prove that someone checked boxes without performing the required tests. The flight data from her mission exposes every lie. The room is quiet when she enters. Not out of shock, out of respect. She places the printed telemetry on the table. Each chart is a mirror reflecting the negligence beneath months of paperwork. The narration crystallizes the moment. The Apache didn't fail. The system around it did. And the person who cut corners had almost cut lives. The inquiry room is colder than the rest of the building, as if the air vents were deliberately set to remind everyone that judgment happens here. The walls are plain, bone-colored, unadorned, humming faintly with recycled air. A long rectangular table divides the space in half. Nameplates stand in an orderly row, each bearing a rank, a role, a quiet authority. A small digital recorder sits in the center, its red light steady and unemotional. On one side of the table sits the maintenance NCO whose initials appeared again and again in the Apache's logs. His posture is rigid, but the rigidity looks forced, not disciplined. His hands remain folded, unmoving. No face is shown, only the tension in his shoulders, the shallow rise and fall of his breathing. Across from him sits the veteran. Calm. Still. A folder of printed telemetry rests beneath her hands. Her worn jacket and the dog tag around her wrist look strangely out of place against the sterile backdrop, but she seems not to notice. Or perhaps she simply refuses to let the room dictate her presence. The board members settle in quietly. Pages shuffle. Pens click. A chair scrapes across the tile with a soft rasp. When the recorder beeps to life, the tone is sharp in the silence, like a starting gun for a race no one wants to run. The narration takes the role of witness as the evidence unfolds. First, they review the logs, rows of handwritten entries, digital timestamps, checkmarks that look neat enough to be believed, until compared with reality. The veteran lays out the discrepancies with steady precision. She arranges sheets on the table in a sequence that tells a clear story. Repairs documented at times when the aircraft was not present. Sign-offs during shifts that were never assigned. Faults disappearing from records only to reappear in the next flight. Each sheet slides forward like a card in a quiet game where the stakes are measured in rotor blades and human lives. The board members exchange glances, not heated ones, but the measured looks of people recognizing what they hoped not to see. One officer circles a line with a pen. Another taps a finger on a timestamp. They ask questions sparsely, never raising their voices, never breaking the cold, procedural rhythm of the room. The narration observes the maintenance NCO without judgment, but without mercy either. His breathing shifts when certain pieces of evidence surface. His shoulders rise when they discuss availability rates. They fall when the telemetry from the test flight is presented, objective proof that the fault was real, and the log tests were not. No one shouts. No one accuses. The silence does that work. The board examines motives next, not out of curiosity, but protocol. The narration outlines the culture that often festers in the blind spots of military efficiency. The pressure to keep aircraft flying when parts are delayed. The expectation to meet readiness numbers even when conditions resist cooperation. The unspoken fear that grounding too many aircraft could cost someone a career. Corners aren't always cut with malice. Sometimes they are cut with exhaustion, or fear, or pride. But the damage is the same. When it is her turn to speak, the veteran keeps her testimony brief. No embellishment. No condemnation. She speaks of the Apache not as a weapon, but as a system built on trust, trust between pilots and maintainers, between logs and reality. Her words are paraphrased through the narration rather than heard directly. She explains that a faulty component is survivable. A falsified record is not. One lies to the machine. The other lies to the people who step into it. Her voice, through narration, remains steady, without anger or triumph. She is not here for vindication. She is here for accuracy. When she finishes, the room sits in a still, heavy pause. The board members close their folders. The recorder clicks off. Decisions are made not with dramatic pronouncements but with signatures, brief notes, and a final stamp that echoes lightly off the table. The maintenance NCO is removed from duty, pending further review. Procedures are rewritten. Independent inspections are mandated. New oversight protocols are initiated. No applause follows. No relief washes over anyone. It is simply the machinery of truth correcting its alignment. And for the first time in days, the Apache's shadow outside no longer feels like a warning, but a turning point. Morning arrives quietly, without ceremony. The sun edges over the far berm of the base, flattening the shadows and turning the flight line a muted gold. It is the same landscape the commander walked through after the near crash, hangars yawning open, crew members rolling carts, the distant hum of generators warming up. But today, the air carries a different stillness. Not tension. Not dread. Something closer to clarity. The Apache stands at the center of the line, re-inspected from tail rotor to nose sensor. Panels resecured. Wiring corrected. Every bolt double-checked by technicians who worked through most of the night. It no longer wears the aura of a wounded survivor. It sits with a new, unspoken dignity, a machine whose truth has been restored. Crew members move around it with deliberate respect. Their motions haven't changed, same tools, same checklists, but their posture has. Shoulders a little straighter. eyes more focused. They wipe surfaces with practiced efficiency, but with an awareness sharpened by what almost happened. The commander approaches the cockpit ladder, carrying a small object cupped in his hand. Morning wind brushes the foam residues still lodged in the tarmac cracks. He climbs the steps slowly, his boots clinking against the metal rungs. The dog tag waits where it was left, resting on the edge of the console, caught in the faint beam of daylight filtering through the canopy. He picks it up, turning it between his fingers. The engraved letters catch the light in brief flashes. He remembers the pilot's silence in the mess hall, the tremble in his hands, the way he walked out without his helmet bag. Surviving a crash is its own kind of noise, one that lingers long after alarms stop. With steady hands, the commander loops the dog tag onto a small ring near the cockpit frame, perfectly visible, perfectly secure. Not as a charm, not as a warning, but as continuity. A reminder that the aircraft carries the stories of those who fly it, and of those who nearly didn't return. Down on the tarmac, the veteran waits with her duffel, the same posture she carried when she first arrived. The commander descends the ladder, crossing the distance to her with slow, measured steps. They stop a few feet apart, sunlight haloing the edges of their jackets. No salute. No formal handshake. Instead, a brief clasp of hands, strong, silent, enough to say everything the moment requires. Her grip holds gratitude, acknowledgement, and a goodbye all at once. He nods. She nods back. It is an exchange between professionals who understand that resolution isn't loud. She turns toward the waiting transport vehicle. The duffel swings lightly at her side. As she walks, her boots crunch over the gravel, each step steady, unhurried. She climbs aboard without looking back. The door closes, and the engine grumbles to life. The bass continues. A mechanic calls for a torque wrench. A forklift reverses with a warning beep. A flight crew jogs toward briefing. Normalcy resumes, this time with honesty woven into its routines. Moments later, the Apache lifts off for a routine sortie. New crew. Clean diagnostics. A stable climb. It rises into the morning sky with the simplicity of a machine that finally behaves like one. No drama. No hidden fault. Just flight. And on the quiet tarmac below, the dog tag taps lightly against the metal frame as the rotor wash sweeps past. Not a warning, but a memory honored. There's something strange about stories like this. They begin with impact, noise, alarms, metal bending under pressure, and end in a quiet that feels heavier than the crash ever did. Because once the dust settles, once the aircraft is repaired, once the reports are filed, something lingers in the empty hangar air. You can train for the impact. You can rehearse the checklist. You can memorize every warning tone the machine might throw at you. But nothing prepares you for the silence after. The silence when the cockpit goes dark but your heartbeat doesn't. The silence when the system insists everything is fixed, yet the truth says otherwise. The silence when people trust the paperwork more than the evidence of their own hands. That's where the real work begins, not in heroics, but in patience. Not in shouting, but in listening. Not in the explosion of failure, but in the patterns left behind by human decisions. The veteran didn't return to fly. She returned to confront that silence. She stepped into it the way she once stepped into combat, calm, deliberate, unshaken. And what she uncovered wasn't sabotage or conspiracy. It was something far more common, the slow erosion of responsibility under pressure. The shortcuts that make sense in the moment. The paperwork that hides more than it reveals. Maybe that's why this story matters beyond one Apache on one flight line. Because every workplace, every team, every system has its own version of that silence. Moments where it's easier to sign the form, check the box, trust the expert fix, even when something inside you knows the problem still breathes beneath the surface. So ask yourself, where in your own world does the silence collect? Where do patterns keep returning because no one has traced them back to their source? If this story resonated with you, share it. Tell someone about the time you saw the fix fail. Leave a comment if you've ever been the one who noticed the thing everyone else overlooked. And if you want more stories about duty, truth, and the quiet forms of courage, subscribe. Stay with us. Because some heroes don't save the day with dramatic rescues. Sometimes they simply make sure the next person gets to come home.